One of the biggest misconceptions about childhood anxiety is that anxiety itself is the problem. I actually want you to think about it differently because your child was actually designed to experience anxiety. If they're walking through the woods and suddenly they see a bear, I absolutely want their brain and their body to respond. I want their heart rate to increase, their muscles to be ready to move, and their attention focused on the threat. Anxiety is part of an incredibly sophisticated protection system. The problem is what happens when that protection system starts responding to everyday life as though the bear is always there. We saw this with a teenager named Maya. One of her biggest struggles when she first came into our office was anxiety, especially surrounding school. If you've ever had a child struggling with anxiety, you know it doesn't necessarily stay contained in their thoughts. It can affect sleep, digestion, mood, concentration, social situations, and even how they physically feel when they're getting ready to walk out the door. I like to explain this using a smoke alarm. A smoke alarm is supposed to be sensitive. If your house is actually on fire, you don't want an alarm that says, let's wait another 20 minutes and see what happens. You want it to respond immediately. But imagine if that same smoke alarm started screaming every time you made toast. The alarm isn't necessarily broken. In some ways, it's become too good at doing its job. It's detecting potential danger everywhere. Anxiety isn't always your child's nervous system overreacting. Sometimes it's a nervous system that has become too good at protecting them. There's some fascinating neuroscience behind that as well. Your brain has networks that are constantly evaluating what's happening around you. And the amygdala plays an important role in rapidly detecting emotionally significant information and potential threats. Areas of the prefrontal cortex help provide context and regulate that response. But anxiety isn't confined to the brain. That threat detection system communicates directly with the autonomic nervous system, changing heart rate, breathing, digestion, muscle tension, and the body's overall state of alertness. And that's where I think we need to broaden the conversation around anxiety. Medication doesn't have to be the first or only option. There's another piece of this conversation that I think gets overlooked far too often as well, the physiology of the nervous system itself. Research has found that people with anxiety disorders often show differences in autonomic regulation, including lower resting heart rate variability and reduced parasympathetic activity. That matters because the parasympathetic nervous system, including vagal pathways, is deeply involved in our ability to regulate, recover, and move out of a stress response. That's the piece we're particularly interested in Milestone. We're asking the question, how well is this nervous system actually adapting? Because if the smoke alarm keeps going off, I don't just want to know how we can turn down the volume. I want to understand why it became so sensitive in the first place. Why is this child's body preparing for danger when they're sitting in math class? Why does walking through the doors of school trigger physiological systems designed to respond to a threat? And perhaps most importantly, why does their nervous system sometimes struggle to recognize when that stressful moment has passed? To answer those questions, we have to go deeper than anxiety as an emotion. We need to understand what's happening between the amygdala, the prefrontal cortex, the autonomic nervous system, the HPA axis, and the vagus nerve. Because the real question isn't simply how do we make this child feel less anxious? It's why does their nervous system keep sounding the alarm? So what is actually happening inside your child's brain and body when the alarm goes off? Let's say your child is getting ready for school. Their brain is constantly taking information from their environment and comparing it with previous experiences. One of the structures involved in rapidly identifying emotionally significant information is the amygdala. If those threat detection circuits decide something about this isn't safe, they don't wait for your child to logically think through every possibility. They can begin activating the body's protective systems almost immediately. One of the major pathways involved runs through the hypothalamus, which helps connect what's happening in the brain to what's happening throughout the body. The sympathetic nervous system increases activation. Heart rate can rise, breathing changes, muscles tense, digestion can slow, attention narrows towards whatever the brain believes might be the threat. At the same time, another system called the HPA axis can release cortisol and other hormones that help the body sustain that stress response. And here's what I want parents to really understand. Those physical symptoms aren't separate from the anxiety. They're part of the anxiety. The stomachache before school, the racing heart, the sweaty hands, the child who suddenly has to use the bathroom before walking out the door, the teenager who says, I don't know why, but I just can't go in there. Their body can already be responding to a perceived threat before they even be able to logically explain what they're feeling. But your brain also has systems designed to put that threat into context. The prefrontal cortex plays an important role in evaluating what's happening and regulating our response. Instead of simply asking, could this be dangerous? It helps us evaluate, is this actually dangerous right now? And then we need another incredibly important ability, recovery. Once the challenge has passed, the autonomic nervous system needs to shift states. Parasympathetic pathways, including those involving the vagus nerve, participating in regulating things like heart rate, breathing, digestion, and recovery. This is one of the reasons why heart rate variability, or HRV, has become so interesting in anxiety research. HRV gives us information about beat-to-beat variations in heart rhythm and aspects of autonomic regulation. Research has repeatedly found lower resting heart HRV on average in people with anxiety disorders compared with healthy controls. These findings reinforce something really important. Anxiety has measurable physiology. So when I look at anxiety from a nervous system perspective, I'm interested in the entire cycle. Can the brain recognize the challenge? Can the body appropriately mobilize to deal with it? And when that challenge is over, can the nervous system shift back toward regulation and recovery? Because we need both sides. I don't want a child who never has a sympathetic response. If a car pulls out in front of them, I want that system to activate instantly. If they're standing backstage before performing in front of 500 people, some activation is completely appropriate. The problem is when the nervous system loses flexibility and begins spending too much time in protection mode, or has difficulty recovering from the stressor when the stressor is gone. That's what I mean when I talk about adaptability. A healthy nervous system isn't calm all the time. It's flexible. It can activate when life demands activation, regulate when the situation is safe, and move between those states without getting stuck. So then we have to ask one more question. Why does one child's nervous system move throughout that cycle relatively easy, while another child's nervous system seems to get stuck there? That's where their neurological history starts to matter. So why does one nervous system recover relatively easily, while another seems to stay on high alert? Usually, I don't think there's one simple answer. This is where in our office we talk about something called the perfect storm. It's our way of looking at the accumulation of stress throughout a child's neurological development. Prenatal stress, a difficult birth, early illnesses, injuries, disrupted sleep, emotional stress, sensory overload, and the demands of everyday life can all become pieces of that child's story. Rather than looking for one event to blame, I'm interested in the total load that nervous system has been asked to adapt to. Because remember what we talked about earlier, the problem isn't that your child has a stress response. They need one. The question is whether the nervous system has enough flexibility to activate when necessary and come back down when the threat has passed. That's where our approach at Milestone Family Chiropractic is different. When a child comes in struggling with anxiety, we're not trying to measure how anxious they are. We're looking at the physiology beneath the stress response and asking, how is this nervous system functioning and adapting? We use neurological insight scans to give us objective information about that. Heart rate variability gives us information about autonomic regulation and adaptability. Surface EMG helps us evaluate patterns of muscular activity and neurospinal tension. Thermal scanning gives us another window into patterns associated with autonomic function. We put that information together with the child's history and what the family is seeing at home to build a much more complete picture. Then, based on what we find, we create an individualized chiropractic care plan. Our goal with that care isn't to claim that adjustment treats an anxiety disorder. Our goal is to support nervous system function and adaptability, then objectively reassess along the way instead of simply guessing whether things are changing. This is where I come back to Maya. Remember, when she first came in, anxiety, especially around school, was one of her family's major concerns. After completing her initial care plan, her family reported a significant change. She was doing much better, and that anxiety that had been such a major part of her everyday life wasn't really something she was feeling anymore. What Maya's story does illustrate is why I think the nervous system deserves a seat at the table when we're talking about anxiety. Because anxiety isn't just a thought. It's not an emotion, not just an emotion. It's a whole body physiological response involving the brain, the autonomic nervous system, hormones, breathing, heart rate, digestion, muscle tension, and our ability to recover after stress. So if your child is struggling with anxiety, I think we're allowed to ask deeper questions about what's happening physiologically and look at ways to support the nervous system as part of the bigger picture. At Milestone Family Chiropractic, that's where we start. Measure first, understand the nervous system, build a plan based on what we find. And ultimately, the goal isn't to create a child who never experiences anxiety. We want them to have a smoke alarm. We just don't want burnt toast to feel like the house is on fire. We want a nervous system that can recognize a real threat, respond to it when it needs to, and then have enough adaptability to recognize the danger is past. I'm safe. I can recover. That's what a resilient nervous system is designed to do. your child has been struggling with anxiety and you'd like to understand more about how their nervous system is functioning, schedule a neurological insight scan at Milestone Family Chiropractic. Let's stop guessing and start measuring, because when we understand more clearly, we make better choices, and better choices create better outcomes for everyone.